Evelyn Hart's Sundays were usually quiet. She spent them arranging fabrics, sketching designs for her interior studio, and letting music fill the soft spaces of her Oregon home. Life had grown still since her husband Peter passed away 3 years ago. The silence used to hurt, but now it had become familiar. Quiet, she could live with. Her life was steady, ordinary, and safe. Until the knock came, when Evelyn opened the door. 2 familiar faces stood before her, Daniel and Lily Moore. They had once lived 3 streets over. Friends she hadn't seen in years. Daniel looked older. His once dark hair streaked with gray, and Lily had that same kind smile she always had. Though now there was something weary behind it. Evelyn welcomed them inside, surprised but warm. "It's been a long time," she said, trying to read their expressions. They sat in her cozy living room where the scent of coffee and cedar hung in the air. The conversation began politely, full of those small, awkward smiles people use when they don't know where to start. They talked about old neighbors, the town changing, how fast time moved. Yet Evelyn felt something unspoken beneath their words, a tension they couldn't hide. It was as if they had rehearsed this visit, and now that they were here, they didn't know how to begin. Finally, Lily set her cup down. Her hands were trembling slightly. "Evelyn," she said softly, "we came because we have something important to tell you, something you deserve to know." Evelyn frowned lightly. "All right," she said, steady but curious. "It's about our daughter," Daniel said, his tone slow and cautious. "Grace," Evelyn smiled faintly. "Grace? The little girl who used to play in your yard? She must be all grown up by now. She's turning 18 next month," Lily replied. "And she's been asking a lot of questions lately about her past, about us." And she hesitated. "About Peter." The sound of her late husband's name froze Evelyn in place. Peter, it had been years since. Someone else had said it out loud in her house. "Peter," she repeated quietly. Lily nodded, her eyes full of apology. "Grace, she wants to know who he really was, and we thought maybe you could help her understand." Evelyn's confusion deepened. "I don't understand," she said, her voice low. "What does Peter have to do with Grace?" Daniel took a deep breath, his expression tense. "Because Peter was her biological father." The words struck like a slow echo. Evelyn blinked, waiting for him to take it back, waiting for it to make sense, but the silence that followed was heavy and real. Her heartbeat quickened. "That can't be true," she whispered. Lily's eyes filled with tears. "It was before you 2 were married. A brief mistake, one we both regretted. I never told Grace, but now she's asking questions we can't answer without you." Evelyn sat back slowly, her hands trembling. For years she had believed she knew everything about Peter, his kindness, his dreams, his loyalty. The idea that he had carried a secret like this before they even started their life together felt like a wound reopening. She looked at the photo of Peter on the shelf beside her, his soft smile, his blue eyes frozen forever in memory. "You should have told me," she said quietly. "We know," Daniel said, guilt heavy in his voice, "but we thought it was best to keep it buried. Grace is our daughter in every way that matters. We didn't want to hurt anyone, but she deserves to know the truth about where she came from." Evelyn struggled to breathe evenly. Her thoughts spun through years of marriage, trying to find signs. Hints, anything that could have told her Peter had once shared a past she didn't know about. But she remembered only love, only honesty. And now, a part of that memory had cracked after a long silence. She finally spoke. "Why come to me now?" "Because Grace wants to meet you," Lily said softly. She found old photos of Peter online and recognized him from one of Daniel's old boxes. She knows there's more to the story. She's not angry, but she's curious. And she wants to understand who he really was. We thought maybe you could help her." Evelyn looked down at her hands. Her wedding ring still glimmered faintly on her finger. Meeting Grace meant facing a part of Peter she never knew existed. It meant looking into the eyes of a young woman who carried his blood but was raised by someone else. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. Daniel leaned forward. Evelyn, this isn't easy for any of us. We're not asking for forgiveness, just honesty. Grace deserves that." The sincerity in his tone, the quiet pain in Lily's eyes, it all softened something in Evelyn. As much as her heart ached, she knew they were right. The truth had already found its way out. The only choice left was how to face it. She nodded slowly. "If she really wants to meet me, I'll be here." Lily's relief was immediate. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she said, "Thank you. You have no idea how much that means." They stood to leave, but before stepping out, Lily turned back one last time. "Evelyn, for what it's worth, Peter loved you. That was real. Whatever happened before, it doesn't change that." Evelyn's throat tightened. She managed a small, fragile smile. "I know," she said softly, "but it does change something." After they left, Evelyn stood in the quiet doorway, the cool air brushing against her face. The late afternoon sun was dipping low, coloring the sky in orange and pink. It's the way it used to on the evenings Peter would come home, still laughing about something trivial. She missed that sound now. Even the silence carried his memory. She walked back to the living room and picked up his framed photo. "Who were you, Peter?" she murmured. "And what else didn't I know?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. But deep down, Evelyn felt a shift inside her, not just pain, but something else. A curiosity. A strange, quiet hope that, maybe through Grace, she could rediscover a piece of the man she lost. As night fell, she stood by the window, the photo still in her hand. The street was empty, the town peaceful. But Evelyn knew peace wouldn't last long. Somewhere out there, a girl who carried Peter's eyes and his smile was waiting for answers. And when Grace came, Evelyn's life, the one she had carefully rebuilt after heartbreak, would change once again, for better or worse. The past was knocking at her door, and this time, she was ready to open it. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, staring at the quiet street, replaying Daniel and Lily's words in her mind. Peter had a daughter. The idea felt both impossible and undeniable. Her heart wrestled between pain and curiosity. By morning, the decision was clear: she would meet Grace, not because she wanted to reopen old wounds, but because she needed to understand who Peter had been before he became her husband. 3 days later, Evelyn stood at her front door again, this time waiting. She had brewed coffee, baked a small batch of scones. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was her way of calming the storm inside her. The knock came softly, hesitant, as if the person on the other side was afraid to interrupt something sacred. Evelyn opened the door. And there she was, Grace Moore. The young woman had long chestnut hair that caught the morning light. Her eyes, deep blue and thoughtful, made Evelyn's breath hitch. They were Peter's eyes. Grace smiled nervously. "Mrs. Hart?" she asked. "Please, call me Evelyn," she replied, trying to steady her voice. "Come in." Grace stepped into the house, her gaze drifting across the framed photos of linen and Peter smiling on their wedding day. Vacations, holidays, a life built on love and quiet devotion. Grace stopped in front of one photo and stared. "That's him," she said softly. "I've only ever seen a few pictures. He looked happy." "He was," Evelyn said gently. "At least, I'd like to believe he was." They sat at the kitchen table, the air thick with uncertainty. Evelyn studied Grace quietly, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she spoke. How her fingers fidgeted with the rim of her cup. She could see Peter in those small natural movements. It was like watching a familiar melody play on new strings. "I don't know where to start," Grace admitted. "My parents told me last week. They said he, Peter, was my biological father. I thought they were lying at first. But then I found letters, old ones my mom kept. His name was in them." Evelyn's heart tightened. "Letters." Grace nodded. "He wrote her before he met you, I think. They weren't love letters, more like apologies. He said he wasn't ready to be a father, but wished her peace. I don't blame him, really. I just wanted to know who he was." "What kind of man?" Evelyn paused, unsure how to respond. How do you explain a man who is kind but complicated, loving but human? Peter was gentle, she said finally. He loved deeply, sometimes too deeply. He always wanted to fix things, to make people happy. Maybe that's why he made mistakes. He wanted to please everyone. Grace nodded slowly. That sounds like someone I would have liked to meet. Evelyn smiled faintly. You would have. He had that way about him. The conversation drifted to stories, small, harmless ones at first. Evelyn shared how Peter used to hum while painting their porch, how he burned every batch of pancakes he ever tried to make, how he once got lost driving 5 minutes from home. Grace laughed softly, a sound that made Evelyn's chest ache in a strangely comforting way. Then Grace asked the question Evelyn had been dreading. Did he ever mention me? Evelyn hesitated. Honesty felt like a fragile bridge between them, but lies would only break it. No, she said quietly. He didn't, but that doesn't mean he didn't think about you. Peter carried guilt easily. I could always tell when something weighed on him. Maybe this was part of that. Grace nodded, her eyes glistening. I don't want to take away your memories of him. I just needed to know if he was a good man. He was, Evelyn said firmly. Flawed, yes, but good. He loved people the best way he knew how. They sat in silence for a moment, the ticking clock filling the space. Evelyn's heart softened. For the first time since Peter's death, she felt something like peace. Grace wasn't a reminder of betrayal, she was proof that love, even imperfect, could create something beautiful. Would you like to see his things? Evelyn asked after a pause. Grace looked up, surprised. Really? Evelyn led her to the study. The room still smelled faintly of pine and paint thinner. On the shelves were Peter's books, his sketches, a box of old tools. Evelyn handed Grace a small wooden box. He kept this on his desk. I haven't opened it since he passed. Grace opened it carefully. Inside were photos, ticket stubs, small notes, mementos of his life. And among them, folded neatly, was a letter. Grace unfolded it, reading silently before passing it to Evelyn. The letter was addressed to the one I hurt. Evelyn's hands shook as she read Peter's familiar handwriting. If you ever read this, I hope you found happiness. I was a coward once. I ran from responsibility, from fear, from myself. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope one day what came from that mistake grows into someone kind and strong. That would be enough for me. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes. He did think about you, she whispered. Grace's voice cracked. He did. They stood there. The letter between them a fragile bridge built from truth and regret. Evelyn realized that Peter had carried the secret not out of selfishness, but out of fear. He had wanted to protect everyone, even if it meant carrying the burden alone. Grace looked around the study again. It's strange, she said softly. I feel like I know him now, even if I never met him. Evelyn smiled sadly. Maybe you do. Sometimes love leaves pieces behind in unexpected places. The afternoon light spilled through the curtains, golden and soft. Grace lingered, asking more questions, what his voice sounded like, what made him laugh, what he dreamed about. Evelyn answered every one. It was painful, but healing too. When Grace finally stood to leave, Evelyn walked her to the door. The air outside smelled of rain. Thank you, Grace said quietly. For sharing him with me. Evelyn touched her shoulder gently. You don't need to thank me. You're part of him. That means you're part of me too, in some way. Grace smiled through tears. Can I come again sometime? Any time, Evelyn said. The door's always open. As Grace walked away, Evelyn watched her go her stride steady, her head lifted high. Peter's daughter. His second chance, long delayed but finally realized. When Evelyn closed the door, she felt something shift inside her. The ache that had lived in her chest for years began to ease. For the first time since losing Peter, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt full of the life, love, and forgiveness he had left behind. She went to the window and watched the gray clouds roll over the hills. Somewhere, she thought, Peter would have smiled at this moment, the two women connected by his imperfect love. both finding peace in the truth as rain began to fall. Evelyn whispered to the empty room, "I think you'd be proud of her." And deep down, she believed he would be. A week passed after Grace's visit, and the quiet inside Evelyn's home felt different. It wasn't the heavy silence of grief anymore. It was the calm that follows a storm. She found herself thinking of Grace, often how she had Peter's eyes, his calm tone, and even that small, thoughtful pause before she spoke. For years, Evelyn had carried unanswered questions about her husband's past. Now, Grace's presence seemed to fill in the missing chapters of his story. On a bright Saturday morning, the doorbell rang again. Evelyn opened the door to see Grace, standing there with a nervous smile and a bouquet of wildflowers. "I hope it's okay that I came," she said softly. "Of course," Evelyn replied, warmth in her tone. "You don't have to ask." Grace stepped inside, holding the flowers close to her chest. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, though Evelyn could tell she'd come with purpose. "I wanted to bring these. My mom said Peter used to pick these for her once." Evelyn looked at the flowers, daisies and lavender. Her eyes softened. "He used to bring me the same ones. Guess he never changed that?" Grace smiled faintly, and the two women shared a quiet moment of connection that felt both strange and familiar. Evelyn placed the flowers in a vase on the kitchen counter. "Sit, Grace. Tell me how you've been." Grace exhaled, taking a seat. "It's been confusing," she admitted. "My mom doesn't like me talking about him. She says it's the past. But I can't stop thinking about who he was. I feel like part of me just woke up." Evelyn nodded, understanding too well. The past has a way of doing that. It waits quietly until you're ready to face it. Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a small weathered notebook. "I found this in one of my mom's old boxes. I think it was his. There's a note inside, something about this house." Evelyn's heart skipped. Grace handed her the notebook. On the first page, written in Peter's neat handwriting, were the words, "For the life I couldn't finish, and the love I was lucky to find." Evelyn traced the ink with trembling fingers. It was definitely Peter's handwriting. "I didn't know this existed," she whispered. Grace hesitated. "Would you read it with me?" They sat together on the couch, flipping through the pages. The entries were simple daily thoughts, sketches, and half-finished sentences. Peter had written about his fears, his dreams, and small moments of life. One page caught Evelyn's eye. "I wish I could tell them both how much they mean to me. One gave me life again, the other gave me forgiveness I didn't deserve. Maybe one day they'll meet not as strangers, but as two people who loved me for different reasons." Evelyn froze, her throat tightening. Grace's eyes filled with tears. "He wrote this about us," she said quietly. Evelyn nodded, unable to speak. The words felt like Peter had reached out from the past just to bring them together. They sat in silence, the weight of the moment pressing gently between them. For the first time, Evelyn didn't feel like Peter's secrets were walls. She saw them as bridges. Grace looked around the room, her gaze landing on a painting hanging above the fireplace. "Did he paint that?" Evelyn smiled. "Yes. He called it the horizon. He said it reminded him that life always continues beyond what we can see." Grace studied it. "It's beautiful. Do you ever paint?" Evelyn laughed softly. "No. I used to watch him, though. He said I was his best critic." Grace grinned. "I'm not an artist either, but I'd like to try someday." Evelyn's expression softened. "You should. He'd have loved that." As the afternoon light shifted, their conversation flowed easily. Grace told her about her life, how she was finishing college in Chicago, studying to be a teacher, how she'd always felt drawn to art without knowing why. Evelyn listened, realizing how much Peter lived on through this young woman. After a while, Grace said something that caught Evelyn off guard. "I've been thinking about telling my mom that I met you. She might get upset, but I don't want this to be a secret." Evelyn nodded. "Secrets don't protect people, Grace. They just make love harder to find." Grace smiled faintly. That sounds like something he would have said. As evening approached, Grace helped Evelyn make dinner. They moved around the kitchen easily, as if they'd done it for years. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the house, and laughter began to replace the quiet that had once lived there. Evelyn felt something she hadn't in a long time: companionship. After dinner, they went out to the porch. The air was cool, the sky painted in pink and gold. Grace looked out at the horizon and said, "I used to think missing someone you never met was impossible. But now I know it is." Evelyn reached for her hand gently. "And loving someone you've lost doesn't have to end. It just changes." Grace nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you, Evelyn, for sharing him with me. I know it can't be easy." "It's easier now," Evelyn admitted, "because you remind me that his story didn't end with me. It continues with you." They sat there for a long time, watching the sky fade into twilight. The moment felt sacred, like a soft promise whispered between generations. When Grace stood to leave, Evelyn walked her to the door again. "You're welcome here any time," she said. "You don't have to call first." Grace smiled. "Next time, maybe I'll bring some of my drawings. You can tell me if they're any good." "I'd like that," Evelyn said. "Very much." After Grace left, Evelyn lingered by the window, watching her car disappear down the street. The notebook sat on the table beside her, still open to Peter's words. She picked it up and read the last line again. "Maybe one day they'll meet not as strangers, but as two people who loved me for different reasons." Tears slipped down her cheeks. But this time they weren't from grief, they were from gratitude. She whispered to the empty room, "They met Peter, and you were right. We're not strangers." Later that night, Evelyn placed the notebook beside Peter's framed photo on the mantel. She lit a candle and sat quietly, the flame flickering against the soft hum of the house. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She realized something beautiful in that moment sometimes. Love's truest legacy isn't what it gives you, but what it leaves behind for others to find. And now, through Grace, Peter had given her one final gift: a reason to keep living, to keep feeling, to keep remembering. The clock struck midnight. The candlelight danced. Evelyn smiled to herself and whispered, "Good night, Peter." In that soft, golden glow, peace finally returned to the house that had carried so much. A month passed since Grace's last visit. The rhythm of Evelyn's life began to feel lighter, almost peaceful. She still missed Peter, but the pain wasn't sharp anymore. It had softened into something warm. She spent her mornings in the garden again, trimming roses, humming to herself, and sometimes rereading Peter's notebook. Every page felt like a conversation between the past and the present. One afternoon, as autumn began to color the trees gold, Evelyn received a message. It was from Grace. "Can I come over tonight? There's something I need to ask you." I think the words felt serious, but Evelyn simply replied, "Of course." That evening, as the sky turned lavender and the first chill of fall touched the air, Evelyn brewed 2 cups of tea and waited by the porch. When Grace arrived, she looked nervous but determined. She carried a small envelope in her hand. "Everything okay?" Evelyn asked, motioning for her to sit. Grace nodded slowly. "Yes. I just need to talk about something important." Evelyn studied her expression. "Take your time." Grace placed the envelope on the table. "I told my mom about visiting you." Evelyn's breath caught. She knew that conversation wouldn't have been easy. Grace continued. "At first she was angry. She said I was reopening wounds that should stay closed. But then she told me the truth. She said Peter always wanted peace between all of us, that he was a good man who made mistakes, but he never stopped caring." Evelyn nodded gently. "That sounds like him." Grace smiled faintly. "She even told me something I didn't know: he wanted to be buried here in this town. He wanted to rest near the lake." Evelyn's eyes softened. "He loved that place. We used to go there every Sunday morning." Grace exhaled deeply. "That's why I'm here. I want to honor that. My mom said she doesn't have the strength to come, but she gave me his ashes." She touched the envelope. "I thought maybe we could take them to the lake together." Evelyn was silent for a long moment. The air between them felt heavy, but not sad, just full of meaning. Yes, she said softly. Let's do that. The next morning, the two women drove to the lake in Evelyn's old car. The road was quiet, the scenery painted in soft autumn shades. When they arrived, the water was still, reflecting the orange sky like glass. Evelyn felt her heart ache, but in a tender way. Grace held the small urn close, her hands trembling. I didn't know him the way you did, she said quietly, but I feel like I do now. Evelyn stepped beside her. And I didn't know you existed for most of my life, but I feel like I was meant to. They stood there for a while, the wind brushing against their faces, carrying the scent of pine and water. Then, together, they opened the urn and scattered Peter's ashes across the lake. The wind caught them gently, spreading them into the sunlight. Evelyn whispered, "You're home now, Peter." Grace wiped a tear from her cheek. "Goodbye, Dad." For a moment, everything was silent except for the soft ripple of the water. Then, as if on cue, a pair of swans glided across the lake. Evelyn smiled faintly. He used to call them his quiet guardians. Grace let out a small laugh. Maybe he's saying goodbye. They sat by the lake afterward, watching the sun climb higher. The sadness didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clean, almost freeing. Evelyn looked at Grace and said, "You know, I think he wanted us to find each other. He couldn't fix the past, but he wanted us to." Grace nodded, eyes glistening. Maybe this was his way of teaching us how to forgive. Evelyn smiled. Or how to keep living. After a long pause, Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a small folded paper. "I made something for you." She handed it over. Evelyn opened it carefully. It was a drawing of Peter sitting by the lake, smiling. The style was rough but full of feeling. "You made this?" Evelyn asked softly. Grace nodded shyly. "I'm taking an art class now. You told me he'd love that, remember? I wanted to show you what I've been learning." Evelyn's voice trembled. He would have been proud. So proud. The moment felt like closure, not an ending, but the start of something new. Evelyn felt peace settle inside her like a calm tide returning to shore. As they packed up to leave, Grace hesitated. "Evelyn, I was wondering, would it be okay if I visited sometimes? Not just for this, but to talk. I don't really have anyone who understands this part of me." Evelyn smiled warmly. "You don't even have to ask. You have a place here, always." Grace's eyes filled again, but this time with relief. She hugged Evelyn tightly. "Thank you for everything." When they drove back, the air inside the car was quiet but full of warmth. Evelyn could feel that something had shifted. The pain that had once defined her days had transformed into something much gentler, shared love that transcended time. Later that evening, after Grace had gone home, Evelyn sat on the porch again, watching the sunset over her garden. The sky glowed in soft orange hues, and the wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers. On the table beside her lay Grace's drawing, the edges fluttering in the breeze. She picked it up, tracing the lines with her fingers. Peter's smile in the drawing looked exactly how she remembered it, calm, knowing, full of quiet love. Evelyn whispered to the wind, "You brought her to me, didn't you?" The leaves rustled softly, and she took it as an answer. A small knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, a courier stood there with a package. "Delivery for Mrs. Thompson." She signed for it and opened it on the porch. Inside was a framed photograph, Grace and Evelyn by the lake, laughing with the sunlight glowing behind them. There was a note attached. "Thank you for helping me see who he was and for showing me what love still looks like." Grace. Evelyn smiled through tears. She placed the photo beside Peter's picture on the mantel, then lit the candle once more. She looked around the quiet house, now filled with reminders of connection and peace. "You did it, Peter," she whispered. "You brought us both home." That night, Evelyn sat by the fire, the gentle crackle filling the silence. The house didn't feel empty anymore, it felt alive. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. And for the first time in a long while, Evelyn didn't feel like she was holding on to the past. She was living it through memory, through forgiveness. And through Grace, The world outside her window was calm and bright. And as the night settled in, she smiled to herself, whispering words that carried into the dark. Thank you for reminding me what love truly means.